Hello and welcome to the Telos Initiative podcast. I'm Angelo Cole.
I'm Chris V. Hill.
And I'm Matt Mays.
So today we're going to be discussing the topic of beauty. Pretty heavy and intense topic. I guess to start off, what would be a good definition of beauty?
I was wondering if you were gonna bad wedding speech this topic, because Webster's dictionary defines love as... Okay, well, if we're gonna define beauty...
We could go to like a formal definition, but I figured it's best to try and hash it out ourselves and try and figure out what is this phenomenon of beauty that we're actually talking about, and not what does Webster's dictionary say.
So I have a definition for wisdom, but I don't have a definition for beauty. Which is interesting now that I think about it.
So, most people, when they think of beauty, would probably think of aesthetic beauty, visual beauty, might even gravitate towards the notion of sexuality. Like when you say beautiful, first thing you think of is a beautiful woman or a beautiful man. I don't think that's all-encompassing of what beauty actually is, but it at least points us in a certain direction. What is it about something that makes it aesthetically beautiful? I think... go ahead, Matt.
Yeah. Well, let's think about how we experience beauty. We can take it from our perspective and paint a picture. Like let's actually try and paint a mental picture, right? Like
Sure.
say we're out in the forest. We have the rustling of the leaves. We have the wind blowing the trees. We have a sense of something, a call into the forest. It's elusive, but we pursue it. We're drawn to it. We're called to it. Yet it's elusive. There's a mystique to it. And I think that is one feature of beauty. Like here we are trying to define it. We're trying to wrap our minds around it because it's something that eludes us. Now we can have different definitions of what a beautiful thing is, or what's beautiful on the inside or beautiful on the outside, and we're experiencing it relatively, but the feeling that we get, we seem to share a lot of the definitions of how we experience it. Like something that captivates us, something that seems right. Like you said something very interesting in our last episode regarding beauty as being. Like being beautiful. That really stuck with me. So we could say that the ideal way of being of something is beauty. And that can span into many different forms. In the aesthetic, if we take the wisdom, right? Like the word wisdom, like we think about the word philosophy, how the word philosophy is made up, like philos, the love of Sophia. The word Sophia is meaning for, she represents wisdom. It's the love of philosophy. So here we are, gathered here because we love pursuing the meaning of things. We love
Right, the Telos.
the Telos. Yeah, there's something that's captivating to us that draws us in. Something that feeds us. Something that feeds our minds and our souls.
I like to think of beauty as a sort of hidden order. There's something about something that's beautiful that points to a hidden order or purpose or telos. for instance, if you think of what does a beautiful landscape look like, well, a lot of ideas that might pop into your head have to do with something that cultivates life, that works towards order and flourishing, like bodies of water, rivers, streams, beautiful, luscious grass, animals, birds flying in the sky. When you think of something on the opposite end of the spectrum, what's ugly, it's usually barren, or there's predators, or there's fear associated with it. It's something destructive to the natural order. At least that's what I sort of see beauty alluding to. So sometimes, in order to figure out what you're trying to talk about, you have to kind of look at what the opposite end of the spectrum might be. Just like when they discovered what certain parts of the brain do, they would take out that part of the brain or damage it and see what's missing. So in order to figure out what's beautiful, what can we see that is not beautiful, that is ugly? I think the traditional notions you might find have to do with waste, fecal matter, or just ugly actions. Maybe killing or violently hurting someone innocent. Those things are all ugly. Even something that's not necessarily evil or wrong, such as something like aging. You could say there's an ugliness to it, but there's also a paradox to beauty, because sometimes things that traditionally would be considered ugly can be beautiful in their own way, like aging. There is a sense of beauty to it, and I would say the reason that we can say that is because we're supposed to age. There's a beauty and a hidden order there. So even though it's associated with death, you're following a sort of natural order as you're going towards death.
It seems like, because last episode we were talking about the power of three.
Right.
Right? Truth, beauty, and goodness.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like our telos, the end to which we are going towards, is all three of those things.
Right.
And we're talking about beauty today. We'll probably, right, have a podcast for truth and goodness, presumably.
Sure.
Right, sooner or later. But you can't talk about... Well, I don't think that just one of those things, in and of itself, is an end to itself. Like that same beauty that draws us to the good and the true can also draw us away from it. Like the same principles of advertising that sells you medicine can also sell you cigarettes.
It's so interesting when you say that. I think of technology. I think of the ways that we can use the same tools for different ends. Like it's simply the way that we use them, and it's simply the intention with which we use them. Like, hackers, for example, there are different types of hackers. There are black hat hackers, people who break into your bank account. There are gray hat hackers, the ones who, well, usually for idealistic purposes, or they're just curious, some very journalistic. And then white hat hackers who are hired by companies to look into their security flaws and so that they can fix them. So they're using the same tools. They're using the same tool set, but for different intentions. And when we think of truth, beauty, and goodness, that that gives an axis to the morality of the actions which they're taking with the same tools.
Ah.
I was at the Lakewood Marketplace, I guess, about a month ago with a friend, and an artist had created these different animal depictions, but he had included sections of the golden ratio, like, incorporated into the skin of the animals. Wow. It was really neat. Like, there's an order there that's springing forth from nature, and it was really cool.
That's a good point to bring up. The golden ratio, if you've ever been to an art class, a lot of times when they get into the proportion and composition part of the class, they'll talk about the golden ratio and how a lot of people use that as a way to draw the eye towards a certain point. And there's a sort of natural order to the golden ratio. You find it in a lot of architecture from ancient Greece. You find it in nature. You find it in galaxies. It just reinforces that hidden order idea that I was talking about earlier.
Yeah, and
sorry for all the banging, guys. That's we're kind of recording in an environment with my daughter is running around full of life.
It's his sacred legacy.
Sacred legacy.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's my contribution to beauty.
I love it. We're talking about the golden ratio and geometry. Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with cymatics? Do you know what that is?
Absolutely. So
yes.
Vibrations or patterns that you get from vibrations.
Yes.
More specifically with sand, when the sound waves propagate through sand and you get different patterns depending on different tones.
Yes. Yeah, okay.
Super fascinating.
Yes.
I didn't know what it was called, but I have seen that video.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
I
actually did an art project on cymatics.
Reinforces what you just said.
Is that CY? Cymatics?
Yeah. Cymatics.
Yep. So it really reinforces the idea of the interconnection between the sensory and this true order, this really showing in the geometrics of the patterns that show up. Like literally, if you make this tone, then this pattern shows up. Something that is just written into the order in that display, showing how all these interesting, beautiful patterns show up.
A lot of modern spirituality, what do you call it? Neo-spiritual guru type people who get into things like chakras and vibrations and energy readings. They, I think, have picked up on this idea that there's a link between geometry and sound, and there's some sort of hidden order there, and you can associate. I mean, if you think about it, light waves literally are different wavelengths. Mm-hmm. So red would be a longer wavelength than ultraviolet, and if you think about sound and vibration as a fundamental property of everything, you could say that everything is vibration to an extent. And if you think of vibration as language, which goes back to our first podcast, you could even say that everything is associated with language, and that could be this hidden order that we're alluding to.
Okay, so
on a physical level, at least.
So when I construct a painting that looks really nice, that's really beautiful, that has a beautiful order, maybe a good order, a true order, I'm speaking to whoever's looking at my canvas then. Which makes me think, if I go out to the Grand Canyon and I look at that thing, is that something like the divine speaking to me in his language?
I would say absolutely.
Have you guys been to the Grand Canyon?
Yes.
I have not. That is on my bucket list.
Oh,
For sure.
It's crazy because you think you know what you're going to see from pictures, but seeing it in person is honestly very different. There's a majesty to it.
I'm sure. I'm absolutely wow. I have no doubt.
What really made me think was like I look out at the Grand Canyon, and it doesn't look real. Like it's a real thing, and it's out there. It's like right in front of you, but it looks like virtual reality. It's so beautiful that my mind didn't interpret it like it was a real thing. It was so beautiful and majestic.
Majestic. Wow. So I think it's worth talking about art, really, because art is the human. What do you say? The human calling to beauty. Really, it's the aspect in which we pursue beauty. And you mentioned a painting before, and you kind of glossed over like, oh, a beautiful painting. Well, what do you really mean by beautiful? And different art styles have tried different techniques to strive towards what they think is beautiful. Some of them do go for aesthetic beauty. It's all about colors. It's all about alluding to composition or leading lines or perspective. Just the techniques and the skill required to do that itself make them beautiful. And then there's also mental pieces of art that points to beautiful moments in time, art that reminds you of aspects of your humanity that are important, maybe a childbirth or the love of a mother and a son, or even a spiritual level where it's just pointing at something that's hard to even put into words, but you just can connect with it.
Yeah. Well, I do want to just... Maybe this is a slight tangent, but, Alex Gray painted, something like a woman giving childbirth, and it was really like you could feel like there's a lot of energy coming out of that, and it's really fascinating. Now, a few months ago, some artists, and I'm really not sure of the scale, I thought it was like a really large statue, but I might be wrong, it might have been smaller than I thought it was. But some artists created a statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary giving birth to Jesus, and it was absolutely horrid. And
wow.
It wasn't like... It wasn't horrid because it wasn't a... it wasn't like a real depiction. It was just like her skin was all lumpy, and it was just like horrible.
I do think that's the tricky thing about art is sometimes your art communicates a different message unintentionally. So if the artist was trying to depict a beautiful moment, but because of the way they crafted this woman giving birth, it sent a distorted message to people where they were like, oh, the way this looks bothers me. That's probably not what the artist intended.
Well, the other aspect of that was that according to Catholic theology, there was no pain in the birth of Jesus, and she was, in this statue, was in pain. And then it was just also ugly on top of that. Everyone was like, why did you A, pay money for this, and then B, put it in the church? Like, it was wrong. Absolutely wrong.
It's funny. I keep seeing this image float around of this guy who was hired to, I think it was like during the Romantic period or something like that, to do this statue of Lucifer, but he made him too beautiful.
It was really,
And then they're like, we can't have this. And then they hired his brother, and he just made him even hotter.
That's pretty funny. But I mean, that actually goes in line with theology, I think, because Lucifer is a temptation.
Well, it goes back to that point, right? Like, the devil uses beauty to ensnare you. Probably uses truth too.
Would you call it beauty though? Would the devil use Yeah, I guess you could call it beauty, right?
Well, you could say that it's a perversion of the utility of beauty.
Right. He's using
Yes.
your
Oh,
faculty.
wow, that was a good
Yeah,
one.
That's
Yeah.
He's using your faculty for moving towards beauty and loving beauty against you.
Yeah, and I had a couple of things. I'm just so
Yeah,
inspired
go
by
for it.
some things
Go
that
for
you
it.
guys were saying.
Sure.
Is like you can have a great intention in the piece that you're making. Like say the Virgin Mary and the example of Alex Gray's portrayal of the birth, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it matters a great deal what type of a translator you are too.
Oh.
I would even go so far as to say if you're a good translator, because what you could be attempting to depict could be an ideal. We could definitely see that that's an ideal right there. Is that what you're actually going for? What you're aiming for, you actually hit. Like you
Right.
have this beautiful idea, and you could even feel it beautifully, but you have to have the technique to reach the beauty that you want to come through, right?
Right.
Like we could say that perhaps the one who did this Virgin Mary statue wanted to have a beautiful depiction of the birth of Jesus, but just didn't quite hit the mark, and that the skin
Right.
looking like it was, and like maybe they didn't know how to create really smooth, beautiful skin.
Either
right?
that or they were intentionally throwing in some ugliness in order to force you to contend with the moment.
Well, there is this weird contention in the church presently. It's just strange.
You're talking about like with
I mean, I guess really ultimately, if I were to put it in a single sentence, there's like a spirit of liberal Catholicism versus a spirit of traditional conservative Catholicism.
okay, not to be
it's-
confused with liberal and conservative politically.
Sure.
I mean, I just think I think that's worth mentioning just because those words have weight. When you say liberal, it's like, oh,
Yeah.
he's one of them.
Yeah.
Them liberal
But
Catholics, right?
But what do you mean by that, though?
I mean, the way I took it is that there are a group of Catholics that are moving more towards traditional, where the church has been traditionally, such as like Latin masses and things like maybe male altar servers. Girls shouldn't be altar servers because like altar serving is supposed to be leading young boys into the church or training them for the priesthood or something like that. And some people are saying, hey, that's just too rigid. The church should be a little bit flexible with the times, not entirely, not changing like dogmatic teachings or anything, but hey, if you need to be a little more flexible with certain things. I mean, I guess it does somewhat touch into some political issues.
Well, we
Right.
don't have to talk about that today,
Yeah.
for sure.
I mean, we're trying to talk about beauty, man. Politics, that's ugly.
Yeah, but we're talking about art, too, and
Yeah.
every church has art.
Right. I think if you really want to get the pulse of a culture, you look at their art. You look at what they're trying to reach with their art and what they're trying to say to you. That'll give you a good idea of where that people is during that time.
Yeah. And it's interesting to think of it in terms of, like, let's say reality of the senses as we experience it. Like, made a comment to, I think, a landscape earlier. Like, if you think about it, the reality of the landscape is the ultimate resolution of what it is. Like, you could have 20/20 vision, and you could still not see it in as clear resolution as it actually is. right? You could be the most highly proficient painter, and you were still gonna, like, say, miss a stroke here or there. It's never gonna be completely 100% what the actual reality of it is. But is that the purpose, right? Because we could say an artist like Monet, who, had was it like astigmatism or something? He had, his eyes were, he didn't see in perfect 20/20 vision, but he painted things as he saw them. So we get to see how reality looks through Monet's eyes, which can have a certain beauty to them that we wouldn't see just simply looking around at physical reality, which could be an accentuation of certain qualities.
Yeah, which brings me to the idea of the objective elements versus the subjective elements of beauty. I think everybody's heard that phrase, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, which is a phrase that popped up during the postmodern movement. Maybe even modernism, I can't remember exactly when it first came out, but it's the idea that anything can be beautiful to somebody. We all see things in different individual ways, and a lot of recent art is pointing to that idea. A lot of art that you see in museums, people are trying to showcase their individualized version of beauty. They're showing things through their lens. Like you mentioned Monet and the astigmatism thing. That there's also Van Gogh is probably the most celebrated artist as of late, because they were making movies and all kinds of things off of him, because his art style was so unique and so individualized that it's a celebration of his individual lens and what that brought to people, as opposed to this notion of objective and universal beauty, where perhaps some things are beautiful to everyone, or should be.
Yeah.
Which is a tough one to contend with, but I personally believe there's a little of both, but ultimately, deep down, we're all searching for the same thing. It's just the roads can diverge sometimes a little bit, but
I think we keep coming back to, in my mind, the concepts of, like, say, traditional, and I'll use the word liberal in terms of open-endedness.
Okay.
Right? So, for example, we, in this period in time, have the ability to experience things from many different places with many different influences, right? Like, I'll go to a culinary example. Like, my family and I by the way, I love food. I love me some food.
Food is beautiful.
Food is beautiful. So we went to this restaurant in Alaska. We were in Alaska, and we walk up to it, and it's just the most unassuming place. Like, it's this kind of roadside place. They literally had the hours scribbled on a board outside, and, like, you go into the bathrooms, people, like, drawn on it. But I tell you, two things that were outstanding were the service and the food. So they brought me this dish. I got this seafood pasta dish that was like bow tie pasta, pesto, salmon, had like some garlic bread. And I tell you, usually, like, when I like food, when I enjoy it, I will just shovel it. That is my style, right? But I took one bite of this stuff. I was like transported. They could, like, my son, my wife, they could see the look on my face. I'm just, whoa. Right. Nice. And I just savored every single bite of this dish. I'm like, and I literally invented a rating system for food. It's what is it? Higher state food, right? Food that, like, that food that's so good that, like, the blood goes to your belly and you're just, oh. Like, it's just they nailed it in every possible way.
Let me bounce this idea off of you.
Yeah.
Because, like, the word cosmic, right, means beautiful order. And as you were experiencing that food, what you were experiencing was cosmic reality.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for real. I was saying that, like, I had my eyes closed. I was like, like, it was, elevated state food.
There you go.
Elevated state food. So whenever it takes me to that place, I call that an elevated state food.
Nice.
That one's kind of it's still at the top of the list.
I'll say I've been there, and the best time I can remember feeling that way was right after a big fast. I hadn't eaten a greasy burger in like months. I was foregoing it for fasting reasons. And when I finally went to one of my favorite burger places and just bit into that burger, it was the best burger I'd ever tasted in my life. Even though I'd had that burger before. And that goes to say something about abstinence and foregoing pleasure. Or is something more beautiful due to scarcity? Is something more beautiful because you can appreciate it in contrast to not having it and to suffering without it?
Yes, and talk a lot about this in relationships too. Like, when you are too close and say you're seeing that person this is one reason why marriage is this is the thing that a lot of people deal with in marriage, right? Is like when you're seeing that person every single day, you wake up with that person that doesn't mean don't appreciate your spouse, definitely do, right? But I'm just saying, when you're seeing that person every single day, you're eating all the meals together, and you like, there's so much familiarity, right? You gotta have autonomy to balance it out, right? So it's actually a good thing. Like, when you're at work, he or she is at work, right? You get some time to be alone, and it makes you a little bit more mysterious too.
Right. There you go.
Unfamiliar. And when and if we're even getting into sexuality, that's why, some people will do things like role playing, right? It's like, it's not you as you're familiar to me. You're Don Quixote. You're the
Hey,
maiden,
that's
and
true. Something about mystery creates an element of beauty.
Yeah.
I'm with it. Okay.
I like that.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of times we keep going back to the same points, but we were talking about polarity in another one of our podcasts, where there's a sort of duality to the nature of reality. You could say male and female. Well, the masculine energy of things is very overt, and the feminine energy is very subvert, very mysterious. And I think that goes along with what you're saying, where there's a sort of beauty to the hidden element of things, like the bride that wears the veil. Something about her is there. You're masking her beauty just to only be revealed for her husband at the right moment.
At the critical moment of the wedding, she's revealed.
Yeah, and it speaks to how you grow together. Hopefully, you grow individually as well, because you're not just you presently. You're an unfolding. Right? There are future elements that come out of you, right? And so then as you're growing, it's and you should embrace that too. If you ever have heard this, like, you're not the same person you're not supposed to be, right? You're not supposed to be, right? So say, hopefully that's hopefully it's a
And
good thing. Like
maybe that adds to the mystery too. Like on the wedding day, like
Absolutely.
who are you going to become?
Ooh.
Who are we going to become?
I
in
love
the
that.
future?
Oh yeah.
It keeps your marriage beautiful.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And that can give you a lot of hope, and say you're in a situation where you have some conflict or whatever. You have something going on between you, right? You can say, well, this person may not necessarily always be the type of person through which these type of issues arise, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we're growing. You can have some grace on yourself and the person that you're with, that you're an unfold. Think of yourself like a tree with multiple rings, right? So that every month, every year that goes by, that's an extra ring on your tree, an extra definition on your tree. And you also have the history of who you were for context too.
I love that. That's a great analogy. Like the rings on a tree, but they're even hidden within the tree too.
Oh yeah.
Other people can't even see your rings,
Oh yeah.
but you know your own history from within. But it also makes me think. Now here we're going from weddings into horror movies, but I want to bring up just the narrative structure of movies. Some of my favorite movies, specifically horror movies, are the ones where they don't reveal the monster, and there's a hidden element to it. Think about like some of those old school movies like Psycho, where you don't really see the killer. You don't really know who it is. And even to this day, I mean, it's hard to say for everyone, but for me, even watching something as old as that, the fact that they keep it hidden and leave it up to your imagination makes the story that much more invigorating.
Yeah. They do that in Alien as well.
Friday the 13th,
yeah.
they do that. At least in the first ones, they don't reveal who it is. And spoiler alert, if for those of you who haven't seen Friday the 13th, the first one doesn't have Jason at all. It's actually his mother. So the whole time you're thinking that all the kids are getting killed by Jason himself, and it's finally revealed at the very end that it's actually his mother.
Wow.
Oh, that
Who
is a
went
spoiler.
psychotic.
I had actually never seen Friday the 13th. So.
Well, you're a little late.
Oh man.
That's true. It has been out for
all
40,
this time.
40 years or more?
Dude, that's on us. We're late to the party,
Yeah,
man.
all right. That's okay.
But I mean, yeah, you're right. Alien has an element of that. And then think about movies, some of the more modern ones, where they just reveal the monster right away. Sometimes, especially if the monster looks a little corny, it kills it.
I do hate that. As long as I have a microphone up to my mouth right now and we're talking about horror movies, if you are going to reveal the monster, wait till the very end and make it practical effects. I am tired of seeing all of these CGI monsters. They look horrible. Just do practical effects.
Oh yeah.
I don't
best-
care what it does to your budget. Just do it.
Well, the best visual effects are the ones you don't notice. Let's put it that way. Because there's a lot of really
the man with the cross on his neck.
which kind of this idea of the hidden element revealed at the end, I think is that's got to be a sweet point.
Ooh, Predator 2.
Predator, that's another one.
Oh, Predator.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Even I want to say even Terminator a little bit, maybe not. Sort of. It's kind of like he's Arnold Schwarzenegger most of the movie until he's that skeleton at the end.
Okay. They reveal him as.
I mean,
Terminator.
it's not exactly like the whole monster.
It's revealing
Yeah.
the monster that's inside.
Yeah, think about a lot of the best stories, and it doesn't even have to be just horror movies. Think about something like Fight Club, where you don't really know exactly what's going on, and then it's revealed. I don't want to spoil
don't
every
spoil
movie
that one.
for everybody.
That one's a really good one.
But by the way, since we're talking Terminator, and we're talking beauty or perceptions of beauty, right? And I'm a huge Arnie fan right here, right? So So I love watching his, like, I actually love listening to him speak. I love listening to his motivational stuff, right? And his come up and how he made this transition from the world of bodybuilding into films. What he would often talk about is, at the time, people who are considered attractive were like Dustin Hoffman and like people like that, right? And, you know, he would get told this by agents. He would try and get into movies to be like, dude, you're so big. Like, what? Like, you have, like, all these leading men, they look like this, and you look like this, and your accent and your you know, your name and all that. So then he does the Conan the Barbarian movie. And he is, because he's so built, he was absolutely the perfect frame to play that character, right? So they're like, and the director said, if we didn't have a body like Arnold's, we would have had to build one. Like, he was already built that way. And then when he did Terminator, because he had the accent, that's one of the things that James Cameron said, like, it made him sound like a machine. It made him sound like we needed the Terminator to sound, right? So
interesting.
Boom, there you go. Like, what was considered deficiencies to all these other people were strengths that characterized him in those movies.
The accent totally worked in his favor in Terminator.
Yes, it did.
Probably even in Conan too.
Yeah, and now, like, we all know the name Schwarzenegger. Maybe not everybody knows how to spell it. I know how to spell it, but we all know that name.
It's even a movie trope at this point, where if you're gonna have a big, strong, like, burly guy, he might talk like this and be like, "Rah."
Yeah.
That's 'cause Arnold.
Yep. Classic distinction, history, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely distinction. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I guess that kind of leads to the final point that I wanted to touch on, which is beauty pointing to the divine. Because you could say all of these things we're talking about, in a sense, have been attributed in some form to God from one religion or another. I know the Islamic people, they don't even like to depict images of God. It's like blasphemous, because there's something beautiful about the hidden order of God that you can't by revealing him and by trying to paint a picture of him, you're limiting him.
You know, you're right. There are no depictions of, like, the Prophet Muhammad, and there are no depictions of like the deity. But if you ever look at Arab art, like, they have ingrained, like, all kinds of golden ratio patterns into everything. Their daggers, their dresses,
which goes back to that hidden order mosques thing, right? They're celebrating this majestic hidden complexity behind everything that gives rise to life.
It's like you could say they're the fingerprints of God.
Sure, Graham Hancock, absolutely.
God stomping.
Is that a Graham Hancock?
That's literally a title of a Graham Hancock.
Oh, Fingerprints
book.
of God?
Hey, Graham. Sorry, Graham.
Sup?
You thought you were clever, man.
Thought it was so cool.
No, but really, though, that's a nice way to think about it. It's the things that God leaves in order for us to understand that he's there.
Yeah.
There's a beautiful notion there.
It does make me think, I just watched Lawrence of Arabia fairly recently, and I mean, it's just, what I really like about that movie is, like, there are excellent landscape panoramas set to beautiful music, and I mean, we're just talking about mosques and Islam and Arabic-esque art forms. There's a line from one of the characters in Lawrence of Arabia that says, "Oh, you're one of these desert-loving Englishmen who comes out here, and you think that the desert's this beautiful place, but everyone who actually lives here in the desert, we want luscious green oases to live in and to live by.
Hmm.
And what kind of got me was, like, thinking about all these desert landscapes. They're beautiful and they're majestic, but the rarity of coming to a mosque adorned with beautiful, right, like hieroglyphs and patterns, that really, like, accentuates the beauty of a temple like that. Is the rarity and like water in the desert. Water's a beautiful thing in the desert because of its rarity.
Hmm.
I don't.
What about the juxtaposition between simplicity and complexity? Because some people would say
we're gonna need
there's
another hour to talk about that.
Well, I would say
I got a thing.
Yeah.
So we're talking about beauty. We're talking about the senses. I just gotta give it up to my favorite. I call him the greatest guitar player of all time, Steve Vai. Right? Yeah,
Absolutely.
he knows. So the way that this man is able to punctuate emotionality in his songs, and I mean, talk about technique. My God, that man can play, right? But he said something once that really stuck with me. This is to guitarists, but you can expand this out more broadly to whatever craft you're in, is to use as much technique as you need to get the point across. To say what it is that you're trying to say. Now, he happens to employ a shitload of technique, but if you can express it simply and beautifully, then that's just as well for you, relative to what it is that you're trying to do.
Yeah, there is a beauty to simplicity, and I think a lot of modern art moves towards that. This idea that the simpler things are, the more efficient and the better they are. However, I think there's also a beauty to decorum and complexity when a lot of elements work together in the right order in a detailed way. It makes something really beautiful, especially when it's hard for you to tell.
Yeah.
Like, there's a beauty to computers, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's got all of these different elements working together in harmony, and when a computer is doing its job really well, you're just amazed by it. And I don't know if there is a single person who could build a computer from the ground up. It's a marvel of the collective human effort. Everyone working together on different levels, because there's people making the microchips, there's people dedicated to processors, and there's people dedicated to the languages that are built on the computer, and then there's people dedicated to specific software, and you couldn't have a single person do all of that in once. It's a super complex collective effort just to make this marvel of technology.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
It's just, you're absolutely right.
Well, I think that about wraps it up for today.
I did want to add, maybe just in the last minute, I mean, at the beginning of the podcast, you asked us to define what beauty was.
Okay.
How about this? Beauty is that element within us that permits oneself to experience good and well-ordered, perhaps divine, reality.
Very nice.
Could you? I'm so sorry. Could you say that again, because the thing was going off?
Yeah, go for it.
Really don't want it to.
I'll fix it.
Oh, okay. All right. So So let's take one last minute, just because you asked us at the beginning to define what beauty was. That beauty is that element within us that permits oneself to experience good and well-ordered, perhaps divine, reality.
I love
Intense.
it. I love
Okay.
it.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for tuning in to this episode of the Telos Initiative. If you like what you hear, please be sure to subscribe, tune in again. Feel free to throw us a tip on our Patreon. And hopefully, see you guys next time.
It's been real.
All right. It's been really, really awesome. Thank you, guys.